All right. So, good evening. Let me tell you what I'd like to do. I want to start off with just a bit of a review of what we did last week. Let Mark get on here. Let Mark attach, connect. Come on, Mark. There we go. How you doing, Mark? All right. Oh, actually, I want to mute everyone. Do that. Whoops. Mute. Forgot. Yes. And close this. Okay. So what I want to do is just kind of review what we did last week briefly, because it'll help us to understand where we're going tonight. I'd like to be able, at least if not the whole, I'd like to be able to read the rest of the chapter tonight, because I don't have that much as far as slides. I have two important ones, two or three, but we should be able to at least read to the end of this chapter. Where we left off, the general idea was how we were talking about how the Nefesh Elokit, its goal, which is seated in the brain, its goal is to completely transform the Nefesh Bahamit, which is seated in the heart, the left side of the heart. And we talk about what kind of transformation in particular. So we started off with the concept of love. We said that there are two types of love. One known as ahava. Let me actually show this to you, this one on the screen, so I can make it very clear. Let me make this smaller. Oops. One is called, the first line, ahava kirishpe esh, which means like a burning fire, just an all-consuming burning fire kind of love. And the other is called ahava beta'anugim, which is more of a love of delight. And what we discussed last week was, what is this ahava kirishpe esh, this kind of love, which sounds like, wow, it's amazing. That's the love that's found in the Nefesh Bahamit. Wouldn't you say, you talk about passionate love, you talk about the burning desire, the burning love, but he demonstrated for us last week that that kind of love is based on missing something, lacking something, and it's about you needing to fill that need. For example, a guy is courting a girl. Guy, I don't know if they say that word anymore, but whatever. Guy is courting a girl, and he doesn't see her for a couple of days, and he's just, he's melting inside. He loves her. He wants to be with her. It's about him needing to fulfill that need. It's a burning love of something that's lacking. That's what the Nefesh Bahamit, even when it serves Hashem, and it serves Hashem out of love. An example I gave is someone comes to your door. He didn't give this. Later in the book, this will show up. But someone comes to your door, and they're hungry. And as a burning desire, because you want to do the mitzvah of tzedakah, of gemilut chasadim, you give the person food. Why? Because you want him to not be hungry. I'll use myself. I want him to not be hungry. I want to feel good that I help somebody. It's a mitzvah that I want to do, but I'm doing it because I still have a little bit of an I involved. That's the Nefesh Bahamit, that there can be a love of God. There can be mitzvot taken action upon. Nevertheless, there's still the I. There's still the ego involved to some degree. The goal of the Nefesh Elokit is to transform that love, that wild, passionate, unbridled love of missing something. What's the lacking in this particular situation? There's the lack. You have a person in front of you that's lacking something, and you want to fill that void. What the Nefesh Elokit wants to do is transform that Rishpe Eish love to Ahava B'Ta'anugim, calm love, but that does not include any I. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version, and then we're going to look at a couple of slides. The Reader's Digest version is as follows. When the person comes to your door, by the way, I'm not advocating one way or the other right now, right? I'm just laying out the plan of the Tanya. When a person comes to your door who's hungry, and the reason you give them food has nothing to do with you wanting to make them feel better, you wanting to make yourself feel better because you did a mitzvah, but only specifically because you love God, and God's mitzvah is to give tzedakah. Nikudah. Not because I want this and I want that, or he needs this and he needs that. Just because you're doing the will of God, that's already ahava b'ta'anugim. It's a different type of love. It's not this crazy, passionate, wild love of something missing, because God has nothing missing that we're trying to fill. So let's take a look at the first at the text. Let's go back to here. I'm going to reread a little bit of the text before we look at what Rav Steinsaltz tells us. Over here where it says the word vahainu. Before he was saying that, as I was saying before, the goal of in this chapter, the goal of the nefesh elokit in the brain wants to transform. Remember, that's itapcha. He wants to transform the nefesh bahamit in the heart, which means vahainu. That is to say, shialevi avovi agia lemadrigat avaraba. That the love that one has in his heart for Hashem through the nefesh bahamit to be upgraded, to be a higher level of what's called ahava rabba, which you also call ahava b'ta'anugim in a minute. The chiba yetera, and he wants to raise it to a higher level of love. From where? Bimadrigat ahava azak rish pe'esh, to raise it from the level of a burning fire of love. And he wants to transform it into the other kind of love, which is referred to in the psukim as ahava shebikushat nefesh elokit hamapechet leto. Oh wait, hold on. I think I said this last week. That I left the line off just a minute. Yes, I did. Unless it's the next slide I had out of order. Just a second. Just see. No. Okay. I realized last week, I'm sorry I didn't do it, but I left something off of this slide. Let me just read to you the next couple lines. He says that you want to transform this kind of love from ahavat rish pe'esh, not you, the nefesh elokit's desire is, to the other kind of love that's called in the psukim ahava b'ta'anuki, the love of of delight. Litaneg al Hashem me'in olam haba, in order to delight in God, which is a form of the world to come. Why? Why is delighting in God through love only a form of the world to come? Because that's what happens in the next world. In the next world, all we will do is bask in the glory of the Shekhinah, but a little bit more than that, but only be have ta'anug, or quote unquote enjoyment and delight from God. I really do need to put this on the screen because it's a lot more. No, it's only 2 more lines. If you'll bear with me, just let me read a couple of lines to you, and then we're going to look at the explanation in a minute. And where is this? He says he wants to transform this. The ha'oneg hu b'moach. We said this already. This oneg, this love of God, this ahava b'ta'anugim, is in the brain. Chochma v'seichel. It's a person's intellect. Hamit aneg b'haskalat Hashem v'yidiyatov. That the more we know, the more we learn, the more we understand God, in quotes, the more we are able to delight in this world from God. Kafi hasagat sichlo v'chochmato, based on a person's level of intellect. A person who has this ability or a level of ta'anugim of one level, what will happen is, again, the goal of the nefesh elokit is to transform the love in the nefesh bahamit to this higher level of love, this higher intellectual level of love. Hu bechinat hamayim v'zera ha'or azarua shebikushat nefesh elokit hamehapechet is the top line of your screen now. Hamehapechet letov et bechinat hamayim shebenefesh bahamit shemehem ba'u ta'avat ta'anugei olam hazeh mitchila. Let me explain this last sentence in English. It's a long run-on sentence. Unfortunately, a lot of his sentences are. He says that he wants to transform this love, this crazy, wild love, this love of lacking that's in the heart, using the intellect first. He's going to go to the emotions later. We'll see. To the level of where he transforms that love and uses the bechinat hamayim, the approach of water. That sounds contradictory. He just said it's a fiery love. I'll explain that in a minute. The fiery love, which has comes from a position of water, and transforms that in the calmness and sereneness of love of God with no strings attached. He says that because all the ta'avot, all the desires in this world stem from the nefesh bahamit, the good desires, the bad desires, the desire to do a mitzvah, the desire to do an aveira, the desire for whatever else it might be, and to transform them totally, that they'll be wanting to serve only Hashem, only because Hashem said that these are my mitzvot. So first of all, we have to understand a few things. We already talked about last week in depth. What is this ahava karish be'esh, this fiery love? Now what we want to talk about is we want to look at a discussion of what is this other kind of love, this calm, delightful love. We also have to understand another thing. What does that mean? The concept of the characteristic of water. What's this business? He's putting in water now all of a sudden. So if you have a slight knowledge of Torah, and specifically here, let me make this slide smaller, and specifically in Sefer Breshit, you will remember that Yaakov Avinu gives a bracha to his children in Parshat Vayechi near the end of the end of Sefer Breshit, that some of it is a blessing and some of it's not such of a blessing. When referring to Reuven, he uses the first two words that are on your screen, on the left-hand side in Hebrew and the right-hand side in English. Pachaz kamayim al totar. In English, unstable as water, you shall excel no longer. Now, forget the whole other part of the bracha, but at the background, this is the expression that's used in the Torah about water, the instability of water. Water is unstable. We know that fire is also. We're going to have to see, we're going to have to reconcile. This is kind of a contradiction in terms here, but how is it, not how is it, but what the goal of the Nefesh Elokit, not only to change over the Nefesh Habahamit from this Rishpei Esh, this burning fire, this lack of something kind of love, and also to transform the water aspect of this Nefesh Habahamit, which is the source of lust and desires and everything else, and to use those to serve God, to change it from this unstable water as well, to make it something stable to serve Hashem. It's a big, tall order. What does that mean? Let's take a look at what Rav Steinsaltz has to say. We'll come back to those other slides. Okay, let's make this big. Okay, the top line here, where it says, Hanikred katuv ahava b'ta'anugim, hitaneg al Hashem me'in olam haba. What is this ahava b'ta'anugim? This thing right here, this love of delight. Arehi lemala me'ahava k'rishpei esh. First of all, he tells us that this type of love is a higher level of love than the Rishpei Esh love. Kasher en od ma'avak betoch hanefesh. There is no more internal struggle. Kasher kol ha'tshukot, kol ha'retziot, shel hanefesh ponot kulan el kadosh baruch hu. Yeshna ava zo ahava b'ta'anugim. What is this other love? The one that's Rishpei Esh, like fire. That is this. There's these desires, this needs, this something you're trying, a need you're trying to fill. But when it comes to the Ahava B'Tanugim, it's a desire only for one thing, to serve Hashem. Nikuda. That's it. There's nothing missing. There's nothing lacking. Your entire desire, your whole tshuka, your whole, that which you hope for and want is to do Hashem's will. That is called Ahava B'Tanugim. He's going to get into more depth. Kamur. Meaning to say, as opposed to the other kind of Rishpei Esh ahava love, hamusedet al hagashat ha'ani, that's based on the feeling of I, the ego, v'achisaron shel ha'ani, and that which I lack. And opposed to that, ahava b'ta'anugim hi ahava, the other kind of love. This ahava b'ta'anugim is the kind of love that sheha'adam einono margish et atzmo klal. He doesn't feel himself involved at all. All he is concerned with is the beloved, the one whom he loves, i.e., God. That's the focus. Only the beloved. As long as the ani, the I, the ego, is no longer important, so too does the lack, your internal lack of something, also becomes less important, or doesn't become important anymore. And it no longer acts on your neshama for this thirst and desire and need for something. All it does is focus. God. That's it. Havazo, this kind of love, misapeket et atzma, fulfills itself or satisfies itself. It doesn't seek to take anything. It doesn't look for ownership over an action. Skip that word because there's multiple explanations. Anytime the love is defined by you receiving something as well. That the more there is that you desire and love, the greater that something feels that you're lacking. When I give this food to the guy who comes to the door, and I'm doing it because I want him to feel good, I'm involved in that equation. I'm not doing it 100% pure. Again, it's still a mitzvah. You still did great, but there's still the ego involved. But when the moment that the love is connected, is related to a completely different existence, like as when you get to the point where this idea of love is only focused on the beloved, not the one doing the loving, meaning me. I'm focusing on Hashem. I'm focusing on the beloved only. At that time, the more I love, the more I act and involve the object of my love, meaning God. This love will fulfill me more. Meaning, as opposed to the love of Rish Pe'esh, that the more I try to love, that this lacking love, this desirous love, this need to be getting myself involved in that consciously or subconsciously in that love, the more that is, the more space there is in that love, the more distance there is in that love. Whereas on the other love, whereas just my intention is only the beloved, everything I want is just for Hashem, everything I want is just for Hashem, just for Hashem, just for Hashem, and I'm not involved in the equation at all, then the more I want, the greater that love grows and the closer to Hashem I become. Yeshkan shinui mahut gamur. There's an actual substantial change here. Ota ahava, that love, that was just filled with all kinds of trials and tribulations, changes to this other type of love, this love of delight. What does that mean? To delight in Hashem as a form of world to come. And from now, I don't have to take ownership of anything. The delight is actually the thing. Shehu ahuv, shehu nimtza, that you're with Hashem. Let's go down here. I said skip. I'm just going to skip this one section here. Go down to where it says here. Avazo nikret ahava b'ta'anugim. This kind of love is known as ahava b'ta'anugim, benigud lahava kirish pe'esh, as opposed to the ahava kirish pe'esh. Sheken ahava kirish pe'esh bevirur eno ta'anug. If you ask someone to be honest with yourself, if you went through this, or a friend of yours who did, if you had a long distance relationship, or while you were dating, or someone in your life, even if it's not a matter of husband and wife, it's just a friend that's very close, and that the farther away you might be, you may feel a love, but it's painful that you're not together. It hurts that you don't see each other all the time at that stage. As opposed to the other type of love. Zo ahava shel ke'ev. This first kind of love, the ahava shel rish pe'esh, is born out of sometimes pain. Shel yisurim, and trials and tribulations. Sholchim u'gdalim, it gets greater and greater. Ze ke'ev sheyesh bo yofi u'mevuam mesuyam gam oneg. It's that kind of pain that has some positives. I mean, you're in love with somebody, but also has, and it has some certain level of oneg, of pleasure. But the reality is, let me make this small. The reality is, mitziut shel chasar. It's a reality of something lacking. Shel katavim menugadim, to like two different poles, polar opposites. Well, how are they? Shel metach goa u'sha shel ke'ev. This tension between, on the one hand, my desire, my love, my object of my love, and on the other hand, the pain that I feel by not being with my beloved. L'umat zot, on the other hand, the other type of calm love is a kind of delightful love that is a form of the world to come. It's a higher level where there's no longer a struggle. That you're involved in one complete level of harmony. Shekol kula avat Hashem. You're totally focused on the love of God. You're not talking, there's no more metach, no more tension of unfulfilled needs, desires. Ella, rather, the closer I get to God, the better it is for me. When a person is only in the presence of God, the love of God. Now, yes, there's no question. Let me put this back here a second. There's no question that when we talk about these two types of love, that 99.9999999% of people who exist do not have this level of love of God. Being realistic, because that means that every single action, every move you make, it is 100% focused on Hashem. I can't say no one, because I have no idea, but it's a level that is beyond our comprehension. Now, wait a minute. Hold the phone, as they say. If it's that difficult for the Nefesh Elokit to transform the Nefesh Bahamit, how in the world does the Baal Tanya start off at the beginning of this entire book? The thesis, the theme of his entire book is not only is it possible to be a very good Eved Hashem, that it's easily attainable. It's within our reach. It's exceedingly attainable. Remember the pasuk. I'll read it to you again. For the beginning of the book, I've gone back to it multiple times. I'm going to go read it again to you. Ki karov elecha. Well, in a few weeks, we're going to read this pasuk in Shul, Parshat Shavua. Ki karov elecha davar me'od. This thing is very close to you. Beficha in your mouth, yilvavcha in your heart, lasoto, to do it. But it's karov elecha me'od. So this sounds a little contradictory. If the goal of the Nefesh HaElokit is to overcome and to transform, not to overcome, to transform the Nefesh HaBahamit to this level of love, and then we're supposed to do whatever we're supposed to do, and yet this is also a safer Beinonim for the average person, there's a lot of unanswered questions here still. Well, that's goes without saying. Obviously, there are. There's still a lot of work to be done here, obviously. Just as an aside, next week, if we don't finish tonight, then the next week we'll be dealing with a tzaddik, definition of a tzaddik based on what the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya says. After that, the next chapter will deal with the Rasha, and then he's going to spend most of his time on Benoni, the average person. Again, we'll use new types of definitions and everything. What he means is a Benoni, a Rasha, an evil person, and a tzaddik, a righteous or saintly person. We'll see what that all means. Right now, let's just focus here. Right now, again, in chapter 9, what we're talking about, Perek Tet, is this transformation of the nefesh, of the two types of love. We also talked about the two locations of the two neshamot, of the nefesh Elokit here, nefesh Bahamit here, the desire of the nefesh Bahamit to penetrate the whole body, to insinuate itself everywhere, that it wants to follow its desires, nefesh Elokit, trying to overcome that, and not only to itkafia, not just to suppress the nefesh Bahamit, but also to transform it, ithabcha, to transform it to be kol kulo, completely with the love of Hashem, ba'avat b'tanugi. Now, the rest of the chapter, which we're going to hopefully read in a few minutes, we'll come to a little bit more on that, but I want to take a look at a couple more comments here. Okay, so here's the statements I would like to make for you. Thirsty, remember, we talked about the nefesh, we didn't talk about too much tonight, but last week, that the nefesh Bahamit, the animal soul, not only is it this burning fire desire for God, but it's thirst. We use this concept of thirsting for Hashem. Thirsting for Hashem won't transform the nefesh Bahamit. It sounds counterintuitive. Sounds like, wow, like everywhere he goes, it's all he can do is he thirsts for God. David HaMelech says, Tzama nafshi le'el chai. My soul yearns, thirsts for the living God. Doesn't sound contradictory? Again, question after question. The times I find pleasure in Hashem, meaning I do a mitzvah only because it's a mitzvah. Everything else is non-existent. That will transform the Hamid into the from the Nefesh Elokit. Okay, I'll come back to that slide. So let's go on Let's continue in the. Oh, I need the text. Sorry. Sure. Let's go back to. Okay, we're going to pick it up from here, where it says "Ukamosha katuv be'etz chaim." Over here, we're talking about the transformation again of the nefesh elokit. The nefesh bahamit by the nefesh elokit to the different type of love. If you don't mind, hang on. I'm sorry, 1 second. Okay, let me just put this over here. Okay. So right here it says Ukamosha Katuv, as it says in the Sefer Eitz Chaim, which is a Kabbalistic Sefer, Shar Gimel Paragimel B'Shem HaZohar, in the name of the Zohar. That what does it say? Shehara Nefach Liot Tov Gamur, that the evil in one's heart completely is transformed into only good. Kmo Yetzer Tov Mamash. Now, I told you that I don't want to look at Nefesh HaBahamit and Nefesh Elokit as Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. He uses those terms here, but we'll see later and understand why I'm making that distinction later. Right now, we're going to use the term that it completely transforms, that even the Nefesh HaBahamit becomes completely Yetzer Tov. How? Bahasir habegadim hatzoim mimenu, by removing the filthy garments, from it, shehem ta'anugei olam hazeh, that are the enjoyments and the pleasures of this world, shehu mulubash bahem, that he is dressed in them, v'chein shar kol hamidot shebalev, hayirah ve'ahava yiyu l'Hashem levado. Not only will the garments of machshava, dibur, and maseh, the speech, thought, and action that are enrobing, so to speak, is nefesh habahamit, which are the source for all his ta'anugim, his desires for this world, not only will they be transformed, but all of the characteristics in the heart of yirah and ahava in his heart will be transformed completely into ahava, yirah Hashem only. That is the focus, meaning that the intellectual part, the thought process, the idea of a person's brain, that will focus only on Hashem, avat Hashem, yirat Hashem. Let me show you one thing first, and then we'll read the next couple lines. Get it down here. I'm going to read this to you. The Yetzer Hara consists of a powerful drive, an appetite for whatever it perceives as good and desirable. This drive is neutral and may be steered in any direction. However, being clothed in a corporeal body, it inclines towards physical pleasures. These lusts become unclean garments for the animal soul's drive. By steering it away from physical pleasures, remember, this is the Nefesh Elokit trying to affect the Nefesh HaBahamit, toward an appreciation of spiritual pleasures, the divine soul strips the Yetzer Hara of its unclean garments. Obviously, we're talking completely spiritually, and clothes it in pure garments, so that it may apply its powerful appetite for pleasures to godly, holy matters. What does that mean? It's using the actions of the desires of the Nefesh HaBahamit only for Nefesh Elokit purposes, and only godly reasons, not for my reasons. This then is the divine soul's desire, that it create, by means of its intellectual faculties, a fear and love of God so powerful as to transform the animal soul to good. Now, at this point, we've only spoken about the intellectual part of doing the transformation. And I know, by the way, this is very heavy stuff. I'm trying to make it I hope, as understandable as possible. But I do want to give you an example. Some of you listening now, some of you may be listening later on YouTube, have my book. And in my book, there's one story that fits perfectly with this as I think a very good example. I'm going to tell you the story. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to tell you briefly the story. Because I was the Rav of a shul, I would only be able, generally speaking, 99% of the time, I daven in my shul, all the tefillot. Dafka on Sunday morning, sometimes if I was up very early, and the davening in our shul was at 7:30, and I didn't want to wait around till 7:30 to daven, so I'd go to a different shul that started much earlier, even on a Sunday morning. So I went to this shul one time on a Sunday morning, this other shul, and right around in the middle of davening, I see a guy walk in with one of these little pointy velvet kippot, a little velvet bag for his tefillin. Looks like it was from the First or Second World War. Guy's probably in his 30s, and just something didn't look right. So it looked a little off. And then I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the way he was putting on his tefillin was also very strange. He had put on his shel yad, his tefillin on the arm. Sorry, my nose itches. on the arm, and then instead of tightening it normally, like pulling on it, he used his teeth to tighten the knot. And not only that, he held his arm straight out when he did it, like this. He was tightening with his teeth. And all of a sudden, I realized what was going on. And I checked afterwards, and I was right. He was a recovering drug addict. And he had been using that motion, or those motions, of putting a tourniquet around his arm, putting the tube in his mouth to tighten it, and making a fist so he could get a blood flow for it to shoot up. And what he did was to transform. That was the exact concept of itapcha, of complete transformation. That the exact actions he was using, not only to kill himself, but to get high, were now transformed into doing a mitzvah. This is a tiny sliver of the example of what the Baal Tanya is telling us right here. He used his intellect, I'm sure with assistance, to change at least that action to do the right thing. Was there Nefesh Bahamit involved? I don't know. Maybe. But we're talking about just this example of what itapcha, this concept of transformation is. And so far, that's just on intellect. Now let's take a look at what he says about emotion. Let's go back to this slide. Sorry. I'm going to pick it up with, let's see, V'chol koach hadibur, right here. It says V'chol koach hadibur. V'chol koach hadibur shebapeh v'hamachashava shebemoach. And also with our ability to speak with our mouths and our thought processes that are in our heads. Our mind, our thoughts will be consumed with the thoughts of God. Our speech will be consumed with God, meaning Torah and Torah-related things. That's the thought, like I just said, the thoughts of God and His Torah. That his discussions, his talk all day will only be godly matters. It never will the Torah stop coming from his mouth. There's an reason he uses that term. For those of you who have remember when we first started the book, it talked about a man who we're going to go back to. It says that Rava, who was called himself a Benoni, an average person, but the Gemara says, how can he call himself a Benoni? That he's only an average person. He's never not learning Torah. So how could he call himself a? That's what he's talking about here right now, not about Rava. He's talking about the idea that what does it mean? How do you know if your thoughts and your speech have been transformed and are being run by the Nefesh Elokit? When all you are thinking and desiring in your mind is about Hashem and His mitzvot and living a Torah life, and all your speech has to do with Torah, learning Torah, acting on Torah, and that's thought, speech. And the third thing, next one where it says right here, V'koach, the beginning of this line, V'koach ha'ma'asi shebi'adayin, and also the actual physical actions that we take. V'shar ramach evarav, it all has 248 limbs. Also, yeh b'ma'aseh ha'mitzvot levad, should only be involved in doing mitzvot. Shulavush ha'shlishi shel nefesh elokit, that's the third layer of the nefesh elokit. Remember, thought, speech, and action. Af. But what is the nefesh? Remember, we said that each one, the nefesh elokit, the nefesh bahamit, both looked to do the exact same thing to the other. It says, but now I'll tell you that after spending a lot of time on the goal, the nefesh elokit, right? The thought, speech, and action transform, do this to nefesh bahamit and everything else. After all those lines, he gives this one sentence on the nefesh bahamit and what it wants to do. It wants to do exactly the opposite. Look, take a look where it says right here, ach nefesh habahamit shemi haklipa ritzona lehefech mamash. The nefesh elokit, which is based in klipat noga, remember, wants exactly the opposite. The tovat adam shitgaber alev yinatzchena k'mashal hazona shebezor kadosh. It wants to overcome the person, and it wants it, but for the benefit of the person. What does that mean? What do you mean he wants the exact opposite? He wants it to be the ego involved, but he wants it for the benefit of the person, so that he should try to win the person over, but that the person should win. What does that mean? It says, K'mashal hazonah shebezar kadosh. It's like the mashal of the parable of the prostitute found in the Zohar. Okay, so now obviously I have to explain what that is. We'll take a look at the next slide. And that will be our last one for the evening. Okay, let me make this a little smaller. Hamashalhu. I'm going to read and I'll explain that which may still need to have some explanation. Hamashalhu b'melech shehayalo ben yachid. This mashal, this parable in the Zohar, about what he's trying to tell us. What is exactly the nefesh bahamit? It sounds like it's contradiction. It wants to have it be the winner. The nefesh bahamit wants to win. It wants the ego involved. It wants the desires. It wants whatever it wants, but it wants the man to win. What does that mean? It says the mashal for a king, shayalo ben yachid. The mashal is the parable is a person, a king, that had an only son. And he truly loved him greatly. And out of his love, he commanded him to not come near any foreign woman. One time, the king wanted to test his son. And for that purpose, he hired a prostitute, and he commanded the prostitute to seduce the son. Obviously, the prostitute would want to try her best, to ply her trade as best as she could, because that's what she was hired to do. But she knows she actually understood that she'll actually get a much greater reward if she's not successful. She also knows that if the son is not seduced, he'll even be on a higher level in the eyes of the father than before. And what will be the source or the reason, the cause for this elevation of his greatness? She will be the source of that. The Yetzer Hara's goal is to seduce the man. But even the Yetzer Hara knows that internally, for truth, the truth to be told, the intention of internally of the Yetzer Hara is the Yetzer Hara wants the person to be able to overcome him. Why? The true nitzachon, the true victory will only come when the person overcomes the Yetzer Hara. Therefore, nitzchona al hanefesh habahamit eino mesamech ota. When the nefesh habahamit wins, it's not mesamech, it's not happy. The opposite. The more the nefesh habahamit loses, the nefesh habahamit is actually happier. Now, this is one of those things that I kind of ran through, but it takes a little bit of time to think about. He's basically saying that, remember, the nefesh elokit wants to transform the nefesh habahamit. He also said the nefesh habahamit wants to transform the nefesh elokit. But deep down, the nefesh habahamit wants to lose that war. It wants to lose that battle because it'll be the person will be on a higher level, and the Yetzer Hara, I'm using that term in quotes right now, The Nefesh HaBahamit will get rewarded for having done its best job possible and losing because that's what it's hoping to do. Again, it sounds counterintuitive. It goes against what some of the things we've learned our whole lives. I'll let that sink in. A lot of stuff here tonight, a lot of deep thoughts, deep stuff. I'll try to give a nice little summary, or maybe I'll have this other Rav give this 5-minute summary next week, Bezrat Hashem. And then we will review a little bit of the chapter and move into Parak Yud, chapter 10 next week, Bezrat Hashem, on the topic of Tzaddik, of righteous person. And that's all I got for tonight. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.